Gabe, this is a big escalation. Explain where this fight stands now and where we think it goes from here.
Yeah, it is, Chris, and this is a very big escalation. And good afternoon from a very crowded briefing room where this press briefing is set to get started in just a few moments. As you said, after the administration froze those federal fundings yesterday, this morning, President Trump writing on social media an escalation. Perhaps Harvard should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity. This essentially it was what the administration has been arguing, that Harvard University has been pushing a political ideology. But as you mentioned, Chris, Harvard University is not backing down and essentially turning this into a battle over free speech and saying that while some of the administration's demand had to do with combating anti-Semitism, in the university's view, most of them were about stifling free speech. Now, of course, this battle has huge implications, not just for Harvard University, but really for institutions of higher learning across the country. And Chris, it is certainly not the only topic that's going to come up in just a few moments when Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt comes into this briefing room. Certainly there'll be questions about that controversial deportation of the Maryland man who was sent to El Salvador, as well as ongoing questions about the future of the administration's tariff policy, which is, of course, being watched by markets across the world. Chris.
Yeah, without a doubt. Gabe Gutierrez, thank you so much for that. We'll keep our eye where you are. Meantime, Eddie, I want to know just some of what the White House had demanded from Harvard. They want a change in governance, access to hiring and admissions data, an end to all DEI programs, and they want to put multiple departments under external audit. As you well know, other elite universities have faced the same challenge, including where you work, Princeton. So I wonder what your reaction is to Harvard's decision to fight back and the significance of that decision coming from, again, the oldest and richest university in the United States.
I think it's extraordinarily important, Chris, for Harvard to do what it's currently doing. I think it sets the stage for universities and colleges across the country. And remember, these institutions are in some ways a jewel in America's crown, some of the best institutions in the world, for them to defend their basic and basic values, their basic mission. And I think we need to widen the aperture a little bit and ask a different question. What is actually behind this assault? What's behind the attack on America's universities and colleges? It goes back to, in my mind, Chris, to 1951 with William Buckley's book, God and Man at Yale. And he worried about collectivism, Keynesianism, secularism, worried about what liberalism was doing. And that was before Black people and women actually made their way to these institutions. I'm not worried about Christopher Rufo. I'm worried about what the Manhattan Institute, what Rehan Salam is trying to do and attack these institutions. So as Harvard pushes back, we need to ask some deeper questions about what's motivating this assault on free speech and American higher education.
Well, Kimberly, we should note this letter from Harvard did not say that it was suing the Trump administration, but it did come from outside legal counsel. So I wonder what the feeling is, and the people you're talking to say, is the belief that this is headed to court, potentially maybe even the Supreme Court?
I think it is all but certainly headed to the Supreme Court, which will have the opportunity that it, in my opinion, it missed last week in proving to be a guardrail to Donald Trump's autocracy. With all respect to my friend, the professor, I'm going to take it back even further to the 1930s when Nazis marched across Europe. They attacked universities. They attacked the rule of law. They pretended to have the support of the people, all while bending the government to its will to usher in authoritarianism and fascism. And that's the moment that we're in. And the Supreme Court needs to recognize that. Punishing students based on their speech is unconstitutional, regardless of what nation of which they're a citizen. That is just wrong. This should be a layup for the Supreme Court, but so should have been the deportation of a legal resident with no way to get him back. And the Supreme Court let that slide, at least in the preliminary, last week, which means that Kilmar Abrego Garcia still is in that brutal El Salvadoran prison. At some point, the Supreme Court has to stand up, read the Constitution, say enough is enough, and be a check on the president, or else democracy is in peril for all of us, including U.S. citizens.
So, Eddie, former President Obama, who I should note went to two of the universities in question, both Columbia and Harvard, tweeted on Monday that he does believe, as you do, that Harvard is setting an example for other colleges and universities. He said he hopes they do follow suit. Something that we heard from the faculty. We were on campus at Columbia just yesterday, and I want to play that.
Stand up for higher education. Second, fight back against the federal attacks.
We need to ask our leadership, why can't you show the same kind of backbone and principles as the leadership at Harvard and Princeton?
As an educator, what particularly concerns me is this pattern of government overreach that's being tolerated by the powers that be.
If we lose our academic freedom, we have lost everything.
On the other hand, Eddie, the last public accounting, I think it was last year, Harvard had a $53.2 billion endowment. So I'm not saying $2.2 billion isn't anything, but it is comparative, right? And most universities could not take a hit like that. They couldn't even come close to it. So realistically speaking, can other colleges and universities potentially respond the way that Harvard did?
Not necessarily, depending upon their endowments. And we have to understand the hierarchical nature of American higher education. There's a reason why the Ivy Leagues are the Ivy Leagues. There's a reason why the Little Ivies, the Williams, the Swarthmores, the Amhersts, why they are secure, and the other liberal arts colleges are trying to keep, make ends meet. So we need to understand the differential nature of financing, right? The financial status of the institutions in American higher ed. I want to say that up front. But I also want to say that, government investment in higher education has a payoff. It's a public good. Cancer research, healthcare research, research around AI, all of this funding that comes from the federal government that in some ways spurs our work in the STEM areas and in the sciences, as it were, has a benefit. So what does it mean to cut it off in this way? And what will happen? How will it impact the country moving forward in terms of, shall we say, some of the brightest minds across the world making their way here and not feeling comfortable doing their work in a place where autocracy seems to reign? And I think that's a question we have to ask ourselves, Chris, as we move forward.
The other thing, Kimberly, that Eddie said at the start was about, the jewel in the crown and why it's so aspirational. I remember in my small town in Ohio when somebody got into Harvard, it was like the town made a collective gasp, right? That's where these schools stand. And a lot of this money, we should say, is covering students who couldn't otherwise afford to go there, right? 55% of the students at Harvard are receiving some sort of financial aid. A quarter of them come from families that make less than $100,000 a year. Would Democrats be smart to frame this about students? Would they be smart to frame this about what quality is brought in? Because it's a jewel in the crown, foreign students aspire to come here as well, to frame it as a place where research gets done with life-saving programs. How do you fight against this if you are not Harvard, the Harvard president or the Harvard board?
I think absolutely, Chris. That is exactly what Democrats should be saying about this, that this is a brain drain, that this is a gift to our adversaries around the world in terms of our readiness to compete in an economy with the smartest people and the best technology and the most cutting edge research. But I think Democrats should also not shy away from the authoritarianism that is at play here. The reason that the elite institutions are being attacked and not yet some of the other ones is because that is what happens. That is what Trump believes, that the elites are somehow poisoning our nation, and by teaching the truth, by talking about what the Constitution actually says. So they are the target, and unfortunately, some, like my graduate alma mater, Columbia, folded, much to my dismay. But I think as Harvard and MIT and Princeton and others stand up, it will make it easier for Democrats to help defend this, although Democrats shouldn't have needed a reason. They should have been out in front on this from the beginning, and some have, but it needs to be a part of that organized message against what's happening.
Doug, as I'm listening, the word elites has become a four-letter word. The right has become pretty successful, right, at making that seem like it's something terrible. And So I wonder what the goal is here. Is it just political red meat for the base? Or do you think that that would be not very wise? That, in fact, what this administration wants to do is to fundamentally reshape the relationship between government and universities writ large?
Well, I think it goes beyond the base. And to get to Eddie's first question about what's causing this, I've been stunned at what I've heard just over the past 3 months and even 2 or 3 years of people who are not Donald Trump fans, people who didn't vote for him, might have written in another Republican candidate in primaries or in the general election, who have said, I'm sick and tired of what I'm seeing happen on college campuses. This happened before the attacks in Israel, but certainly as we saw, Palestinian flags being hoisted on college campus after college campus, there's been a very real backlash. This is part of it. I have concerns about how far the president is going on this and concerns about what research funding is. And I was, Chris, just last week, I was at my alma mater, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm on the board of visitors there. And what I saw from my school's leadership was, here's how we're following the law. Here's how we're able to document every bit of spending that we're doing on F&A money, which is so critical in how you're dealing with the federal government. I'd tell universities, you've got your back against the wall and you're a target. This is a time to also think about not just speaking truth to power and all that stuff that makes audiences on MSNBC happy, but how can we do a smarter job given the environment that we're in? And I haven't heard a whole lot of that outside of UNC at this point. And I've spent a lot of time on college campuses, including the Harvard IOP.